Converting between fractions, decimals, and percents. So you should have a notes page here that looks like what you see on the left, right over there on the screen. Or kind of like this. This is the front cover page, and we'll fill in these empty boxes here at the end. Got our glue here, and you should have your objective information, and we'll talk about the closing question at the end. So we're going to start here, if we open it up, with this section right over here, converting decimals to fractions and percents. So if we start with a decimal and we want to convert it to a fraction and a percent, we're going to talk about that process. So let's try an example. Let's try something like 0.75 or 75 hundredths. So if we start with 0.75, the question is, how are we going to convert that to a fraction and then a percent? Well, let's start with actually the percent first. So here's the process. To turn a decimal to a percent, and again we are working with 0.75, you're going to just move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So an example of that would be right here. I had my 0.75, I moved it 2 places to the right, pretty simple, and that would equal 75%, just like you see here. So all I need to do if I have a decimal is move it 2 places to the right, and that turns it into a percent. Okay, well then, how do we turn a decimal into a fraction? We just figured out how to turn it to a percent. How do we turn it into a fraction? Well, remember, our example is 0.75. So what we're going to do, the new information says, we are going to put the decimal over 100 and then simplify. So the example looks like this. Got 0.75. We put 75 over 100 because it's 75 hundredths. And what you see here, and in this, we don't forget to simplify. Have our little don't forget to simplify teacher right over here. Simplify our fraction. 75 100ths actually simplifies down to 3/4, and that's how we turn a decimal into a fraction and a percent. So here's a practice question for you real quick. Give you about a minute to give it a shot. Convert 65 hundredths, 0.65, to a percent and then a fraction. Go for it. Okay, so hopefully this is what you got. As a percent, move it 2 places to the right, and you got 65%. As a fraction, 65 over 100, and that can simplify down using 5s to 13/20. Alright, go to your middle page here. Let's talk about converting percents to fractions and decimals. So the first percent we'll talk about, I'm giving you a tricky one, is like a decimal. We'll talk about 37.5%. So if we're thinking of 37.5%, to turn this into a decimal, we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So now, instead of turning a decimal to a percent, we're just turning a percent to the decimal. So we're just going to move the decimal 2 places to the left, and we would get 0.375. So this was 37.5%. We move it 2 places to the left, and our decimal answer is 375 thousandths. Okay, then how do we turn a percent into a fraction? Well, I'm going to change the number up a little bit. Let's look at, well, first the process. You convert a percent to a fraction. You turn the percent into a decimal, put the decimal over 100, and then simplify. So let's look at 35%. What if we had 35%? Okay, examples right over there, but 35% means turn the percent into a decimal. So we move it 2 spaces back, and that would equal 0.35 or 35 hundredths. And then we just put that over 100, 35 over 100, and we simplify it down. And when we simplify this thing down all the way, I believe if we do it with 5s, the lowest we can get is 7/20. Always remember to simplify right here. Do not forget that when you simplify. Converting percents to fractions and decimals. All right, so here's your practice question. Give you about a minute to do this one. Convert 36% to a decimal and a fraction. Go for it. Okay, hopefully this is what you got. As a decimal, all you had to do is take 36%, move the decimal back 2 places, and get 0.36 or 36 hundredths. And then as a fraction, you just took this decimal, you put it over 100 right here, and then you just simplify it. I believe when you simplify that all the way down, you can get 9/25, and that is the simplified version right over there. 4 going into both of those numbers, 9 and then 25, the simplified form. All right, last one, converting fractions to decimals and percent. So now we start with a fraction, and then we convert it to a decimal percent. So we start with a fraction like 4/5. How do we turn this into a number with a decimal point and then to a percent? Well, let's start right over here. Convert fraction to a decimal. Divide the numerator by the denominator. So this is kind of a tricky one, usually the trickiest one. So if we have 4/5, you see the example on the side. But all I did right over here on this example is take the 4 on the top, which is the numerator, put it inside, divide by the denominator, and you're going to get a decimal answer because 5 does not go into 4. It's going to be, does not go in a whole time. So when you divide this whole thing out, you'll get 0.8 because 5 wouldn't go into 4 0 times. So you get 0, you get 4, bring down the 0. 5 goes into 48 times. So to turn it into a decimal, we would get 0.8. You just divide the numerator by the denominator. That's the hardest part. So now if we want to just turn it into a percent, again, we have something like fraction to a percent. I changed it to 3/4, but all you really need to do is take the decimal. So if you have 3/4, we turn this into a decimal. A lot of y'all might know off the top of your heads. 3/4 is actually 0.75, like 3/4 is 75 cents, excuse me. And to turn that into a percent, we just do like we know now. We take 0.75 to turn a decimal into a percent. We move it 2 places to the right, and that equals 75%. If you have 3/4, you have 75 hundredths of a dollar. You have 75 pennies essentially, or you have 75% of a dollar. So we've talked about the process. Last practice right over here. I want you to take about a minute. Convert 5/8 to a decimal and a percent. Go for it. Okay, hopefully this is what you got. 5/8 divided the 5 by the 8. Remember, the 5, the numerator, is always the one that goes inside the box, inside the house. Divide by the 8. Get a longer decimal. You get 0.625, 625 thousandths. And then when we move over here, we just take that number, we move the decimal 2 places to the right, and the percent is 62.5%. Yes, you can have a decimal in your percent, but that's 62.5%. So these are the processes for converting between fractions, decimals, and percents, and keep this in your notes journal for future reference.